Hey folks, welcome back to the Meta Abuse podcast. I'm your host, Battle Mode. I'm joined here again by Shaun and Lucid Tactics. And we've also got two other regular guests, Richard Yorp and Daz Tactic. Say hello, guys.
Hello, everybody. I'm Richard. I hopefully be a regular on this podcast. I'm probably, I'm quite friendly with Ben and Daz. And of course, I play quite a lot of grognard games. You want to call them? Is that the way to describe it? The games I play,
War games.
war games. Okay, they war. Got a massive passion for it, and quite a lot of links with Slivering Games and playing a lot of their upcoming titles and also past titles. That's kind of that's who I am, and this is why I'm here.
Richard's a nerd, and we
Mm.
need more nerds on this show because we haven't got enough yet.
Well, everyone I know thinks I'm a nerd, so they think I'm either a nerd or a robot. One of the two. Yeah, we had a great Christmas and into the new year. I hope you're sort of not too disappointed if you're sort of having time off and needing to get back to work. But anyway, yeah, I'm glad to be on. This should be a lot of fun.
Happy New Year, everybody. So we thought that we'd do a kind of 2024 roundup episode, even though this is like basically the first time that we've all got together on the podcast. So it's going to be a bit of a weird episode because, it's going to come across as, hey, these guys that you've only just started listening to, here's our roundup. But, I think 2024 was an interesting year for gaming. As you're going to see, I don't have a whole lot to say about 2024 because I've spent most of it working or playing really obscure old games. But there were some really interesting releases. And I'm gonna start, although I feel like I might be stealing Lucid's fire a little bit here. But in January, we had the release of Dominion 6. And that was a big game for me because I'm a big fan of the Dominion series, as I think everybody here has played it, apart from Shaun. I'm gonna have to double check. Shaun, have you played Dominions yet?
No, I own it, but I still haven't played it.
Oh, it's on your pile of shame, is it?
Yeah, and I don't know how long it's going to stay there for. There's nothing against it. I just haven't gotten to it.
Right. So Dominion 6 is the sixth iteration in Illwinter's really, really long-lived strategy game series. It's a really hardcore fantasy war game stroke 4X game. In my opinion, it's one of the best games ever made. I think yeah, and I don't say that lightly either. It is definitely one of the best games ever made. You definitely have to be you have to be kind of obsessed with details, I think, to enjoy it. So it's very, very intricate and quite complex. I'd say it's on a level, it's not quite as complex as Shadow Empire, at least in terms of number of game mechanics, but it has a very, very deep set of, the gameplay that revolves around the mechanics that are presented is incredibly deep because of the sheer amount of content. The volume of content is very, very high. And I hand this over to Lucid because Lucid's the Dominion's expert, but I'm going to go straight ahead and say this is my game of the year. I think it's by far the best thing that was released. However, it is an iteration in a series, I guess. So it's not a very exciting game of the year, I don't think. What do you reckon, Lucid?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think the Dominion 6 release, I think, first of all, it's really hard to go back and play Dominions 5. There's so many like quality of life things that were added. Like doing like lots of mundane tasks is so much easier. However, I think the multiplayer community isn't quite as big as it was, which is really surprising considering they added things like lobbies and stuff. So it's easier to host games. You can just use that in the game.
What happened?
I think the number of games kind of went down after 5. And some of that is expected because I think the thing is there's a really big community behind Dominions that makes a lot of third-party tools. It makes the map editor, it makes a bunch of balance mods, it makes a bunch of quality of life mods. And then there's huge, like completely transforming mods like Hellenica and things like that.
Yeah.
And to update those from Dominions 5 to Dominion 6 was huge because they added in the mount system. So you have to rework and resprite all of your mounted units. Pretty much every mod had to make major changes along those lines. So it was a huge amount of work to get the mods ported. So arguably for a while, Dominions 5 multiplayer was better than 6 just because it had all the mod content. And then I think there have been less, like I've just been busy. I've been working on making my own game. So I haven't had the time to play a ton of Dominions. I've played 3 full multiplayer games. I haven't put them up on YouTube. Well, 2 full multiplayer games. Yeah, I think I won one and lost one. It was pretty fun. I think one was Middle-Aged Ulm and one was Zabalba. But
Okay.
Actually, listen, sorry, can I just ask you a quick question? You mentioned middle-aged Ulm. That is sort of like, that seems to be way too easy for your superior skill level. Could you elaborate a
Not
little bit
against,
on that
it's
one?
not against good players, man. No, I think they've got
Middle-aged Ulm. Okay, I don't want to give the full guide away, but the like really sweaty try-hard middle-aged Ulm players end up having really strong Doom stacks because they end up building like crystal communion gear. And with that, you can put basically it on any mage and they become part of a communion that you don't need to spend the first turn to like buff your troops up. So they're Doom
kind of broken.
stacks, and then they can also make really cheap items. So they're, even though they don't have like full resistance bless or stuff, all their mages can have all their resistances for like 1 gem per mage per item. But yeah, so you can end up having these really powerful middle-aged Ulm Doom stacks. They're still vulnerable to some things like Winds of Death spam and things like that, but there's sort of some counters.
I'm interested to see how the multiplayer meta's changed. I've not played any multiplayer in Dominion 6, or have I? I can't remember actually.
No,
I've
I
barely
haven't
played
either,
a single
actually.
player either. I've done one
it's
series for
a minute
YouTube,
now.
and I've played a little bit I played a little bit on my own as well, just to kind of get my head around, but I've barely gone back to it. And that's not because I don't love the game, it's because I just haven't had time, really. But I really like the changes. I think the single player changes alone are just make it so much better than Dominions 5. The ability to be able to get out of wars with the AI is just game changing. So it's gone from a game that was, I'd say, an 8, maybe a 6 or 7 out of 10 for a single player game to a 9 out of 10 now. It still doesn't pips Conquest of Elysium for me quite yet, but it's a very different game. So yeah, that's my game of the year. I think Dominion 6 is amazing, and more people should play it, and I should play it more.
I think you're dead right there, Ben. It's as far as the single player aspect of it too, it really has improved incredibly. One of those things, like I remember months ago, you were talking about just how highly you rated the user experience of Dominions, which I always sort of found funny because I always found that the user experience for Dominions was just an awkward mess of stuff. But I think you're right. And it's funny because I like, it's actually ended up being my game of the year as well, like in terms of scoring, because it's just such an exceptional game. And so I had that, like when I did rate all my games, so that was, and I've got like about 70 or 80 games that I rated. And that one was at the very, very top, only just pipping a few others. But it was also when the community, because I did it as a live stream, and the community was also then voting on games. And that was also the community vote was also for Dominion. So Dominion sort of hit everything. In the end, it was the community aspect that actually bumped it over the top to give it sort of my game of the year. But it was interesting. Like I agree with you 100% about what you're saying about it's much more accessible to single player. For the multiplayer, I always like, even though the mods, they weren't there, it was only a few months before the mods started to really come in. So I don't know if the multiplayer aspect, I just wonder if it's sort of, if the game is like, how old is the game now? I'm just thinking it's probably just run its course in that sort of sense that it's just, a natural decline in terms of what people play other than the absolute diehards. I haven't played it at all in multiplayer this year. It's just too much of a commitment for me, but I'm surprised to hear that it's actually sort of dwindling away.
Here's the thing, right? There's a couple of points. One, we found out through a poll at Explorminate that only something like 5% of people, of gamers, will ever even touch the multiplayer button on a 4X game. So I think the Dominions community is not that small. The Dominions community is probably one of the biggest 4X multiplayer communities. I think outside of Civilization and, the stuff that skews the graph in a big way. But for the most part, I think like Age of Wonders probably has got less people than Dominions, even though it's got a big player base. Hardly anybody plays it multiplayer. So Dominions has got a huge, proportion of multiplayer players. Yep. So I'm surprised to hear that I think Lucid, we did a podcast ages ago.
No,
and we were talking, and you estimated like 2,000 regular players, maybe.
Yeah, I think it's somewhere around there. I don't think it's 2,000. I think the multiplayer scene in general is probably around 2,000 players. In terms of like people that are in a game right now, it's probably closer to like 700-ish.
That's still about 650 more than any other 4X game, basically.
It's quite interesting.
Yeah, I think it's good numbers actually. I agree. I think it's I think it's a successful game. Like it's not, and I think it'll just get stronger and stronger. But I think that maybe the player base will change a little bit. I think it's become more accessible, to be honest. Even though it's a very, very complex and deep game, it's it's just so rewarding to play. Like it's I don't know. I think there's a lot of positives that come out of it. One question actually for you guys, which I always found very, very strange with Dominions, and I'm thinking back to Dominions 3, 4, that sort of area. And I don't know. I think Lucid, you've been playing it then. I don't know if you were, Ben, when back in that era, but there used to be I think it was the Matrix forum that they actually really, like, everything was done through the Matrix forum, and then they went and it just had nowhere at all to live for a long, long period of time. And I don't even know where it lives now, to be honest. So I don't know where players go to talk about it. Yeah, I don't know. I
I think it was the
that
Shrapnel forum. Is that right?
may have been. It may have been the Shrapnel.
Yeah, it
Yes,
would
you're
have been
right. You're
Shrapnel.
right. It was
Yeah.
I think they
Yeah.
had Matrix and Shrapnel, but everyone went to
Yeah.
Shrapnel, didn't they? And then when that Matrix, like they stopped doing the Matrix forum, then they stopped doing the Shrapnel forum, but they went to like just the Steam forum or something like that. I thought that was going to
Yeah.
kill the game. I'd be interested on your perspective about that.
Well, it's fractured. What's the other one? There was an old strategy game forum. It wasn't Rock, Paper, Shotgun, though I think that did have a quarter. What was it? Quarter to one was one. They had
Quarter to
like a bunch
three.
of information about quarter to three. They had a bunch of
Quarter to three,
information.
they had information, but not that, only because
Yeah.
they played a multiplayer game of it.
There's Realms
But it
Beyond
wasn't-
as well, that kind of crazy old RPG forum, which is
What's
very
that called again?
4chan. Realms Beyond. It's kind of very 4chan-ish.
Okay.
It's not. It's
No, there's
not really
another edgy
moderated.
kind of edgelord one.
It's
that I'm
edgelord.
thinking of.
Yeah. So
I
that's a
can't
great
remember now.
forum if you want to remember what the internet was like in 1998, before people
Yeah.
told you were allowed to say mean words and stuff.
Yeah.
I fucking
But
love it.
I thought when they stopped using the Shrapnel forum, I thought that was such a big mistake. But it hasn't really sort of hurt the game, I don't think. But I think for multiplayer, it did.
Yeah, there's a lot of. I did games from Steam for a while, but then there was these other small forums that people would end up hosting multiplayer games, and you just share the IP and people join, and you ended up getting this like very fractured community, which was cool because you had all these different metas. Like on some of these forums, everybody attacked everybody on site, so it was just like as soon as you saw people, you were attacking them. Other forums, it was like, okay, we see somebody, we immediately ask for a non-aggression pact, and then we scheme with them to like 3v1 somebody. And so anyway, the game was played really different ways. And then one of the cool things about the tournament that I did was that a lot of people from different forums all came to like play in that. So you got to see which of these metas actually won out. But
That's got to be the only tournament I know that it starts, and then the next year's tournament starts before the first one finishes. It just goes on for such a long time.
Yeah.
That must have been a massive ball ache to do, man. I've got massive respect for you for being able to style out, what was it, 150 odd episodes. That's longer than my Shadow
Right.
Empire series by a half.
I mean, some games get boring after a while. Honestly, those tournament games were fun, I think, pretty much through the whole time. I had fun casting it. There's times where I'm like, God, please end. Like, I just want the game to be over. I don't want to cast another episode. But really, the tournaments were fun all the way to the end. So
What next? So that was my game of the year. What next, guys? Who's up next?
I can go.
Go, Shaun.
Well, for one that is one of my favorites that fits in pretty well with what everybody else is into would be Zephon. We talked about that in an earlier episode. I really enjoyed Gladius. Richard, I think you're a big Gladius guy too, right?
I need to play it. Ben talks about it all the time, and I sit there going, I really need to get You see, the problem is they need to stop releasing DLCs for Gladius. Then maybe I'll get onto it.
Oh, did you try the Primaris one? I haven't had a chance.
Yes, it's amazing. It's amazing. I've got to say that, and I think probably Ben would agree with this as well. Being a child of Warhammer, I live so close to the Warhammer world, and I play Warhammer still till to this day. So I'm still pushing little men on a field, and you just get sucked into that fantasy or the sci-fi of Warhammer 40,000. And bear in mind, I played 40k from 7th edition, and I still have miniatures from 7th edition, and I get sucked into it, and I do digress a little bit, but that's why I'm still playing the new DLC, because I'm like, oh, I've not really fully enjoyed this yet. Let's play some more.
You might be able to not be able to tell because of our
Primaris. Sorry, with Primaris, that like the DLC. So I didn't rate that very highly, to be honest, in terms of the DLC. So I didn't think it added enough to the game. So what is it about that you like?
It's the new units. It's the aggressors, the hellblasters. I think with what they did well on Gladius is it adds just a little bit extra. And I find, like, of course, we're all looking at prices. I think the DLC is relatively cheap. And you do get that kind of, oh, it's a little bit of sprinkle of something new onto the game. And that hopefully, I think I can see from their point of view that bringing more of the tabletop players to the digital field. And like I said, the multiplayer, as we just spoke about multiplayer on 4X Games, me and Ben have played a few games of Gladius, and we've enjoyed it every single time. And of course,
Yeah.
probably relating back to our Christmas game we just did on
Yeah,
the
that was
Slivering
fun.
Crew. For me, that and literally, and probably, as I said before, you just enjoy it. It doesn't matter if you get smashed, you're still enjoying it, and you come back for more. And that's what I like about it. And I do appreciate your comment saying it didn't add really make, but it's the new Fandazdu units that people want to see. The Hellblasters, the Aggressors,
Right.
and
So I think
all the rest of it.
players want to actually have actual factions to play rather than just little additions to an existing faction. I was quite disappointed in that DLC, to be honest.
I think for Slytherin, it's a no-brainer to add something that is going to be adding units to their most popular faction. Because there's one thing that I've learned working at Stardock. It's Brad always says, whenever he looks at the statistics for who's playing which faction in Galciv, it's something like 70 or 80% of people play the human faction and they don't touch any of the others, right? So I know for a fact that most players, like most casual gamers who play Warhammer 40k, are going to be playing the Space Marines. There's no question in my mind about that. And so adding a DLC that adds more, units to that popular faction, it's just a no-brainer financially. So that's why they've done it. I'm not a big fan of the
I thought what
Primaris
they were going to
thing.
do is
So
I'll just jump in there, Ben, because I actually thought what they would have done was to reskin the existing Space Marines and then actually added other equipment in for Space Wolves and the other factions, the other sub-factions. I thought there was such an opportunity to actually add sub-factions to the Space Marines, and that's why for me it was like a bit of it's okay. But
I
not
just
You're
don't
giving
like
them
the
ideas now.
Primaris thing. I think it's a travesty of the law. I really don't like it. Like,
You're giving them ideas.
Richard's just said, Richard and I grew up, well, Richard's from Nottingham and I'm from Derby. And these are the two cities in the UK that are like 15 miles away from each other. And Nottingham is the home of Games Workshop headquarters. So everybody from our area just plays Warhammer pretty much. If you're vaguely nerdy, even back in the late 80s and early 90s when I got into it, that was the case. Like even kids who wouldn't be anywhere near any other nerdy stuff would have probably bought some miniatures and painted them because it was just a big thing around our area. So the very first edition of Warhammer 40k. And I don't know, I just don't like the Primaris retcon. It kind of annoys me. So I've not bought. That's the first Gladius DLC that I've not bought.
Come on, Shaun. Sell us Zephon. We took over here a little bit.
I was going to say, before I go back to Zephon, yeah. So basically, you'd say the appeal of that DLC is mainly for the people who just want the new models and the new shiny, basically. Like we're already really invested into the team.
I like it. And to, of course, agree with what Daz said. I'm sure in the development somewhere, they're going to be dropping out Space Wolves, Imperial Fists. There's imagine it. There's so much more they can do with it.
There's a mod for that, actually, that adds new chapters. But anyway, no, I'm going to go back to Zephon.
Can I ask?
Okay.
I've played Gladius. How do you sell Zephon after? Like, what's different? What's the same? Is it still Warhammer, or is it a different universe, or what's going on?
It's Gladius with diplomacy and an endgame scenario. And without the endgame scenario, the diplomacy doesn't really make any sense. It kind of messes the game up. So so you've got this, it's Gladius with diplomacy and a sort of crazy endgame scenario that you've got to navigate. It's actually really fun.
Yeah, most of it plays very similar. Like you've got your city building, your faction techs, and it's not Warhammer anymore. It's their own IP, like a post-apocalyptic 4X kind of thing they're going for. But yeah, a lot of the warfare, the city building, the research, all that's very similar to Gladius. But then you've got as Ben was saying, your diplomacy and endgame scenarios on top. And then you've also got mutators that you can unlock from certain win conditions to improve replayability, because then you can play them with these random mutators that do different things. So it's sort of like a spiritual successor kind of thing to Gladius, I think. And then they've, on the technical side, beefed up the reduction values, everything looks and sounds better. Everything has voiceover and all that sort of thing. So they've improved the quality there as well. So
just a quick question about the replayability, because that's actually the one thing I'm actually a bit disappointed with Zephon is the fact that it's so structured with the actual flow of the game. And I've only really played it once properly, like as in all the way through. And I really love it. I hope that they make a Gladius too, using what they've done with Zephon. But yeah, that was the one aspect about it that I just was thinking, like it's going to be the same grind at the end. Do you have any thoughts on that one?
I haven't played a lot of games. I think I've played about 4 or 5 games now. I lost, I think, 2 of them. And I've been mucking around with different ideas, like playing them with different mutators. You can turn off the quests like in Gladius, but you can also turn off the end game crisis. So I've tried that, mucking around with the diplomacy and seeing how that works and trying to like pit alliances against each other, game the system, which really didn't work that well because it's, I don't know if it's super in depth, but if you're allied with people that don't like each other, eventually all of them will break with you, and then you end up with another massive war going on again. So I don't know if it's something that's going to keep people entertained for, hundreds of hours, but I'm nowhere near the point where I'm done with it yet. Does that make sense?
One of the things I found about the diplomacy, like I was playing on stream when it first came out, and one of the first things that happened to me, I was talking about the diplomacy, and I was like, right, how do you get a war-focused game like Gladius and introduce diplomacy into it, a notoriously broken 4X mechanic that is just open to abuse, and make it work? And so I was kind of like, I was looking to trash the game because I was just like, I just don't see. They took what made Gladius work was they took their diplomacy out of 4X, and that made it great, right? By putting it back in, they've basically reintroduced all the same problems that you're going to get with standard 4X games, which is it's easy to cheese. The AI doesn't always behave in a way that you're expecting it to. And I was like, what happens when you're friends with everyone in Gladius? It's like a war game, yeah? So it's like, imagine playing Shadow Empire, but everybody's friends. Like, I mean, Shadow Empire's at least got some kind of city building gameplay in there, and that's fun, but not in Gladius. It's not that kind of game, right? And sure enough, I spent a 10, 12 turn period where everybody was just friends for some reason, and I was just like, this is boring. I'm bored now. And then, do you know what the game was like? Fuck you, battle mode. Here's an event. And so like you get this event and you get a multi-choice option. So it was like, oh, we're gonna put some spies into the enemy factions. Do you want to do it? Yeah, okay, I'll try that. And then like 2 or 3 turns later, it goes, oh, bad luck, you lose. Now everyone's at war with you. So, and my audience were laughing at me. They're like, well, Ben, you said you wanted to be at war. And I was like, yeah, but not with everybody at once. Like I literally lost all my allies, and now everybody's fighting me, including the 2 main villain factions. It's fucked up. So that pissed me off. I was like, gamers are gonna hate. Like, I'm resilient to shit like that, right? I laugh and just keep playing because I think it's funny. But I think a lot of casual gamers are going to hate that. Now, whether that was, something that happens often or whether it was just a freak incident or what, I don't know. But so, yeah, the diplomacy is totally broken, as expected.
I hear a little bit of cope, Ben. You're like, oh, I don't get that upset. I just have fun. Dude, you're pissed. You're a little pissed.
I was tilted for probably about 30, 40 seconds. And then I read the comments of people laughing at me, and I was just like, this has just become ribbing Ben again.
But closer to F4.
If it wasn't for the end game, so let me just briefly describe what happens in Zephon without spoiling it. Right, you've got these 2 main factions. You've got Zephon, which is this AI kind of like
you just spoiled it for everyone.
Yeah,
yeah, right.
I'm not playing it now.
And then you got the aliens, and I can't remember what the aliens are called, but the sort of Cthulhu,
the Anchorites.
The voice or something.
Right? Yeah. So you got these 2. You are basically a bit part in this battle between these 2 big things, these 2 big entities, or these 2 big factions. You and the rest of the main, those kind of like main players are, you're kind of like you're like the sideshow, and you're trying to scrape out your own kind of empire while navigating the politics of what's going on between the 2 big factions. Very much like Armageddon Empires in that respect. But so that's really interesting. And it's got this end game scenario that kicks off. I'm not going to spoil it, but basically stuff happens at the end. You've got to prepare for that during the course of your game. And that's where the diplomacy comes in, because you have to play the diplomacy really carefully in order to be able to set yourself up to play whichever side of the game you want to be playing at the end, right? And I think without that end game scenario, the diplomacy is just going to make a mess of the Gladius formula, to be honest, because you can kind of you can cheese the AI with gifts and get them to like you, but they've got this kind of mechanic in where eventually everyone's going to hate you anyway, so it feels a bit contrived. I don't know. It's just one of those things. It's a bit of a weird game. I'm on the fence as to whether it's an excellent game, but I've enjoyed what I've played. The big criticism I've seen from people is that it basically feels like a reskin of Gladius. Now, I don't think it is, because
that's unfair.
I think that's unfair as well.
Yeah, I think it's much more than a reskin, and I think it takes Gladius into a whole other depth. But I still prefer Gladius because the actual plot is so contrived, and the actual flow of the game is so contrived. Whereas Gladius, you are playing basically to the death on a random world. What I would hope is that they go back to the Gladius formula. I do think that they could get diplomacy to work with Gladius. I think that would still actually work fine. It doesn't have to be as deep or as overwhelming as it is in Zephon. So I think that they could still get something working with that. But I think that what they need to do with Gladius, if they did make a Gladius 2, would be to actually have different types of terrain, different types, not just biomes, but actual planets.
I've got a little rogue question for everybody here who's played Zephon and Gladius. For people watching who haven't played any of them titles, which one would you play first?
Gladius, I think.
Gladius. Yeah, I'd play Gladius as well. I don't agree that diplomacy would make Gladius a better game. I think it'd actually take away from it. What's good about Gladius is it's really focused.
Do you know why, Ben?
Because on battle mode.
Endless war.
Yeah,
endless
exactly.
war.
It's not thematic to Warhammer either. I mean, so I think if they did it, they'd have to strictly enforce the law. So Space Marines can't be friends with the Orcs or Chaos. Or
that's fair enough. Yeah,
I think Space Marine factions should be able to work together, and the Imperial Guard and the Space Marines should be able to work together. Or that makes sense. Sisters of Battle should be able to work with the Imperium, but the others, I don't know. I think that it'd be an interesting if they stuck to the lore and they did it in a lore-friendly way. I'm still concerned about how it'd affect the gameplay though, because Gladius has got Daz will back me up on this. It's got a very distinct ebb and flow to the way it plays, right? Kind of know when you go, once you've played the game enough, you'll kind of know when to kind of activate the AI by kind of getting close to it so that it attacks you.
Well, the AI it's the best coded AI I've ever played against. And Zephon's the same.
Really good, yeah.
I mean, Zephon's an incredible AI.
Yeah.
Like if you were just rating it based on if it plays like a human, both those games, you think, I'm playing against a human.
That's quite.
They actually had to nerf it. They had to nerf the AI in Gladius. It was partly coded by Isle or Zilmi. He's a German modder who made an AI mod for Proxy's previous game.
I'm trying to think of the name of it. It's a planet. It's like, what is it?
Pandora.
Oh, Pandora, basically. And so Proxy, I actually interviewed him for Explore. He's a really interesting, really nice guy. And he was saying that they actually stepped back the level of the AI in Gladius because it was too much. But whatever it was they did, they've made a great AI because it plays, it knows when to retreat and it knows when to attack. And that's really rare, by the way, for a game AI. It's really
it actually
rare.
will pulse.
Yes, it will fall back. No, go ahead, Shaun. Sorry.
I was going to say, if you do spend a lot of time playing against it, you get to see little things where you go, okay, they're spamming out heroes or something like that. They do weird little things that a human player probably wouldn't do. But in the broad strokes, it's fantastic. Like they build it. Like I've been at a thing at the moment where I've destroyed an Anchorite city, took out the rogue operative in Zephon, and then I've gone for the second Anchorite city. And now that I'm actually at their second city, you can see all the troops initially came down to try and stop me taking out that first city for the Anchorite. Realized it was gone, retreated, and then waited at the second city for me. So
they're very clever.
Yeah, they're really, really good for as far as game AI goes.
Yeah. No, it's an incredible gaming experience, really, isn't it? Both games in that sort of sense, they really are amazingly well done.
Like biggest question: would you go back to it? Would you go back? Would you play it again?
Still play it. Yeah, I have a game going on PC and a game going on my Steam Deck. So yeah,
it's one of those games like Gladius. You can just pick it up and play, and you know that it's going to be fun, and it's really good to play with multiplayer because it's got a kind of semi-WeGo system. So all the human players, all take their turn all at the same time, and that saves a massive amount of time when you're playing multiplayer. So Shaun and Drexy and I did at least once. I think we did 2 series for Explorminate. And you can play a game through in about 4 or 5 hours, and it's just fucking excellent. It's Gladius is an amazing game. I think Zephon it's got a bit of DLC behind it, and they've fixed some of the, they've tried to polish up the diplomacy system a little bit. I think it's going to be an equally good game.
Well, one question for you guys. I played about 40 hours of Gladius. The units didn't feel that different. Like it didn't feel like tanks were tanks and infantry were. I don't know, and I don't remember all the stats that existed, but it sort of felt like the units were kind of on par with like Civilization units in terms of the differences between them and the complexity, but I could be wrong.
No, I
Yeah.
do understand what you're saying, because I think superficially that's the impression that you end up getting, is basically it's just like a two hit, and basically, it feels like there's not much in it. I think when you start to really have a look at the actual individual weapons that they're using, the ranges that they have on their weapons, and the armor piercing that they have on the weapons, and then the armor that you've got, it's a simple system, but it's actually incredibly rich once you start to pick apart the pieces. So if you, like, for example, if you've got like a certain type of unit that works well, like some units that do double damage at half range, which is usually just one hex. So if you don't fire with those when you have a chance at 2 hexes, and wait for something to close the gap, and if you know if the enemy has to come and close the gap, you're going to do double the damage. So it ends up, there's a lot of nuance to it, but only as you start to scratch the surface. I think when you first start playing, it does feel like it is just simple, but I always really enjoy actually having a good look at all of the different weaponry to see what's actually in play.
I strongly recommend playing it on a really high difficulty setting, because it
Yeah.
forces you to learn that then. Because I agree with Daz. It's a wargaming system that they've put in there. It's a tactics game, but it's a wargaming system that's in there. And the way that combat resolves, it's very much like a game like Panzer Corps or Fantasy General or something like that, with that level of depth. There's a lot of dice rolls going on under the hood. So it seems like it's kind of simple, but it's really not. There's loads of scope for creative play in it as well, and
If I could correct you there, Ben, it's not dice rolls, because it's actually, there's nothing random in it. The outcomes aren't
really.
random. Yeah, if you have a look at
Is
the
it deterministic? I didn't know. I don't usually like
yeah, if
deterministic
you
games.
have a
But
look at
actually, I like.
when it says estimated casualties, they're 100% correct all the time.
Yes,
Okay,
that is,
right, yeah,
that is
that's a
true.
good point. It's rare actually that I don't usually like deterministic games. I usually switch off when there's no dice rolling. But actually, I like this one. So finally, a determined. I see. I thought that it had dice rolls. And there you go. But there's certainly a lot of modifiers and rules in play. So whether you're sat in terrain, the range, there'll be things like morale. There's quite a lot of stuff going on. So yeah, there's a lot going on in
Hey,
terms of what you've got to learn.
you can't blame your bad dice rolls. It's just your bad tactics.
Yeah, good point.
That's it. It's not going to lie.
There's a lot of cool stuff
Yeah,
you can
let's
do
not
as well.
pile
I
on
mean,
Ben quick. Everyone jump on him.
so Lucid was talking about, for a game to be, successful, it's got to have cool stuff, right? And I think Gladius, less so with Zephon at the moment, but Gladius has got some cool stuff that you can do. Like you can teleport Terminators into the middle of a battle, or, behind enemy lines and cut enemies off and that kind of thing. It's full of cool stuff like that, man. Especially if you know the lore. They've really done well translating the different, tabletop game rules into something that fits the formula that they've got. So yeah, I think it's a triumph. And Gladius has sold incredibly well as well. It's the sales numbers are pretty high for a 4X like game. So yeah, the numbers speak for themselves.
Yeah. Well, apparently Zephon already made its money back in like the first month or something. So
Wow.
it's done quite well as well. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if there's as much. I mean, obviously you're not orbital dropping troops in place and things like that, but I've been mucking around with a lot of the end game units, particularly playing as a cyber faction, the emulated mind. And you have there was these ones I was playing with last night called, I think they're Kytherian Annihilators or something. And they're basically like robot snake people with giant purple lasers. And after they kill, like if you line it up so that they can kill something, then they do more damage in the next turn, and then you just chain it. And they've got a special ability where they reset their movement and action points that you can research. So if they're going to reset the action points, kill something else. Yeah. So it's some pretty crazy stuff you can do. I don't know if it's as good for a multiplayer game, maybe, because there's some pretty unbalanced stuff in there. Like I know a very common complaint was one of the factions with a prophet that could mind control units. I don't know what they did to balance that out, but it was a major complaint in one of the earlier versions of it. So there's some pretty busted stuff you can do. But yeah, anyway, I've been really, really enjoying it, and that'll definitely be one of my top games of the year.
That's another thing, by the way, that's notable about Zephon was the way that Proxy kind of drip fed it to everybody through the form of demos. They kind of did this. I think it always sounds like a bad idea to me to do games designed by committee, but that's how they did it. They kind of released a part finished game and said, play it and let us know what you think. So that was really interesting to see them do that. I avoided all the demos because I'm kind of sick of beta testing games, and I've got this problem now where if I beta test a game, I tend not to play it again. So I didn't want to do that with Zephon, and so I completely avoided all of the demos. But yeah, that's an interesting, that's one interesting thing about the development process, and it'd be interesting to talk to Proxy and just see how it was that the the player feedback actually altered the development of the game. I don't know if the Explorminate guys, I think they interviewed Proxy recently, and I don't think I've listened to it. So they might have actually given some insight into the process there. But
you know what the most disappointing thing is about Zephon, in my opinion, is the cutscene at the start. It so doesn't represent the game at all in any sort of fashion. Be interested to see what you guys think of that. I just find that so disconnected to the actual gaming experience and to the lore that they're trying to promote in every single sense. Be interested to see if you feel the same. Whenever I saw it, I actually refuse to play it now if I'm showing the game, because I'm just thinking this is just going to confuse you. It doesn't add anything to the actual game itself.
intro cinematics are a lost art. We were talking about this in the last podcast, or I was talking about it in the last podcast. I was kind of comparing it to an old real-time strategy game called Red Alert, Command and Conquer game, where it's just perfectly crafted, even though, as Lucid said, it wasn't exactly Shakespeare. The story's kind of goofy, but it was just so well done. And there was no, it was impossible for you not to be onboarded into the world that you're about to jump into through watching those early cutscenes. Whereas, today now it's more about just kind of just trying to show off a little bit and just here's some pretty stuff to look at. And, it doesn't work for me. I'm not impressed by that.
I think it's beyond that, actually, Ben. I think it's as a communication piece, as a marketing piece. I just don't think it works at all. I think it was developed way too early. I think that should have been done as the game was getting ready to release, rather than before they even really started work on the game.
Yeah, maybe.
I think it's similar with trailers. Like if you look at the trailer for Factorio, choice, it's all gameplay, but it's got some cool really soundtrack. It's well edited. It's just like a little guy driving around, and stuff's going on in the base. But
I'm going to big you up here, Lucid. I really like the one you did for Dominion 6. Actually, I thought that was really indicative of the gameplay for that one too.
Yeah, but I think that's right. I think that you have to do. The other thing is, I was watching somebody's YouTube video. I forget who it was, but it was like top 35 strategy games for 2025. And so many of those were just like cutscenes, basically, and they didn't show much of the game. I'm like, what? What are we doing here?
Yeah.
So I think there's a pressure if you've got VC funding, you'd be like, oh, look at this cool trailer for this game. Like it's a real thing. And probably people with money are like, yeah, that looks great. I'll give you money. But for gamers, they want to be like, show me the game.
Yeah, gameplay is everything. I agree with 100%. Like if you don't show gameplay in an actual trailer, I think a trailer is different to like the intro. Like the cutscene intro for Zephon is not the trailer. Like it was used as a trailer, but it really is the cutscene to introduce the game. It's actually the start of the story. So I don't mind that being a cutscene at all. I just don't think that I think that the way it was put together didn't communicate that at all. But I do agree with you. I think that if you're looking at a trailer, if you don't see gameplay, I know that if I'm analyzing a game that's coming up, I actually don't even look at the cutscene stuff. I only look at what's actually coming through.
Yeah, let's move on to the next game. We got, you had a game, Daz, that you were saying you wanted to talk about that I don't think I'd even heard of.
I had a fair few games that I really enjoyed this year. But Cataclysmo is one that really I wasn't expecting much from. Like, I don't know about you guys, but like I get offered a lot of games to like sort of what I think are sort of obscure-ish type games to sort of then go and play. And this was one that I just really thought, I can't even really be bothered. I sort of thought that it was like a pretty crappy take on tower defense. And it is a tower defense game at its heart, but it's also a city builder as well. And I found it so fun to play in the sense that you actually have to mine resources, build your castle up with very limited resources, and then sort of set up some sort of defense for the actual tower defense. And every cycle that you then go through, you then got to add on to what you've built before. So it actually ends up being a very, very engaging game, and also like Hooded Horse game. It's probably that's probably the reason that I decided to play it. just because I love their games. Like their Hooded Horse very rarely has a game that isn't really, really interesting in some sort of way. And this is unbelievable. In fact, it says there, design and build fortresses brick by brick. And, you know, you are doing that. You literally are sort of mining resources, deciding where to build like walls or where to build sort of turrets, or like not even turrets, but sort of like, you know, where you've got archers, you then got to sort of recruit different groups that sort of then come into it as well. And, you know, it's like to actually sort of then be your defenders. So you still need to put defenders on your defenses rather than just having them, they don't just work automatically. And you also then have to, during the attacks, you may have to switch like squads across from one part of the battlefield to the other part, depending on if you've left something that hasn't been well set up. It's an incredibly good game. It's really it's a real lot of fun to play.
I was going to say, Hooded Horse have a number of good titles under their belt as well, with like Nordland and Breachway and the Xenauts 2. There's a couple of crackers on there, like,
Yeah.
And if people, if you don't know who Hooded Horse are, please go check them out, because there's an absolute trove of games on there. Literally, absolutely. And just a quick, Xenauts 2 is XCOM is it in the 90s or 80s? I think it is.
70s
In
or
the
80s, I
90s.
think.
70s.
Yeah.
There is 70s. And it's rather fun.
Yeah, it's great.
If you don't like dying horribly and then crying about it, don't play it. Well, still play it, but you're gonna be end up crying.
It's a game that's been in production for probably the longest that I know, maybe apart from Project Zomboid. Like that game, Xenonauts 2, I think they started working on it in 2008. Then they, like after Xenonauts 1 was finished, they pretty much immediately started on Xenonauts 2. So it's been in development for like years. They did a Kickstarter in about 2016 to kind of like keep it going. And it's still not finished. There's one thing I will say. By the way, I spoke to Tim from Hooded Horse for Nominate. He's a really nice guy. He's well into his city builder games. That's why you'll see things like Workers and Resources, Against the Storm, and some other really good, really good games in the city builder genre as well. He's not just a 4X and tactics fan. What I will say about Hooded Horse, though, they do seem to have picked up a lot of games that are kind of like in development limbo. Like, you know, they feel like they're in limbo. Like Terra Invicta, that game went on sale about 2 years ago, and it's still on like version 0.4 or something. So,
wow,
is that ever going to be finished? Like,
actually,
so
Lucid, I just noticed as you're going through the actual like the games there. There's actually a game there that wasn't a Hooded Horse game, which is from essentially a failed studio. Which I'm interested to see that they actually picked that up. Which was Shadow Gambit. Which was,
I was wondering if someone was going to notice that.
Wait, what?
Did you see it? Did Shaun?
Sorry.
You saw Shadow Gambit there as well.
Yeah. I read the story about them getting picked up. So Mimimi Games went under because they launched Shadow Gambit. They got to launch, and then I think they were stuffed. Like even by the time they launched it, and it's like, we don't have enough money. We're going to see how it goes, then release what we've got. And then they wound down and they were closing the studio. And then it was actually Drexy sent me a link to this a couple of weeks ago. There was a Steam announcement from saying that I don't think it's the whole developer. Well, it would have to be surely, but there was like Mimimi Games are now being supported by Hooded Horse, and Shadow Gambit is now being published by Hooded Horse. So they've essentially revived a dead studio.
Wow, because that is by far the best Commando style game I've ever played. I just was blown away by how good that game actually is. It was unbelievable to actually play that one. It's sort of like, it's all scripted, of course, but it just worked so well. I was surprised that the studio collapsed, and I'm now surprised to see that Hooded Horse actually has somehow got it and resurrecting it, which is absolutely fantastic. I love that can actually happen, to be honest.
Yeah, well, I mean,
Monologues yet either, and that's if you're wondering how it is that these guys are affording to pick up all these titles and support them, like Old World, they've picked up Old World. You know, the way that they've done it is through Manor Lords, because Manor Lords has sold unbelievable amounts. Basically, you know, it's a pretty good game. I like Manor Lords, even though it's unfinished, but that they got lucky. They got lucky, and the reason why was because there was this misunderstanding that it was like a Total War game, right? And Total War Warhammer 3 was undergoing having a really bad time. Creative Assembly were having a really bad day, and everybody was pissed off with them because they released a DLC that just wasn't up to scratch, and you know, like loads of other reasons. And Manor Lords comes along, and even the developer had to go, "Hey guys, it's not actually like Total War. Please calm your expectations down." But it didn't work. because the hype train had started up by that point. And that developer became a millionaire overnight as soon as that released. There's no doubt about it. He must have made a fucking fortune. Because, I mean, if you go to Manor and just see how many reviews there are, I mean, it's kind of like Total War levels.
Yeah.
So Hooded Horse are rolling in it. Well, they got to be. I mean, they must have made an absolutely, unless they got a really bad deal on the contract.
Are they a publisher for that? They didn't. I thought Manor Lords was made by one guy.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
And he sold, I think it was something like 5 million copies in the first week or the first month, or something absurd.
Yeah.
So
insane.
There's some ridiculous figure. Yeah, so he would have made a mint off that.
10,000 people playing.
Crazy. That's a lot.
And it is a shame that it's not finished. I think if it was a finished game, the number of players you'd be seeing there wouldn't be 10,000. It would be more like 50, 60. I think a lot of people have dropped, like myself. I played it for about 10, 20 hours, and I was like, okay, this is great, but I want to wait for it to be finished. It is very good, though. If you like that kind of game, it's very good.
Ben. I'm sort of waiting more for it to have more content, be a bit more polished, have a bit more of a meta game with the territories and stuff like that. But
I haven't bought it yet. I'm waiting on that as well.
Yeah. Hooded Horses, they've got some unbelievable games. I think we're sort of we live in a bit of an era at the moment where we've got some pretty amazing publishers. Like there's so many of them now that deal with strategy games. Yeah, we haven't had that before, really. Like we've had Slytherin and Matrix for a long time, which is great, and they bring out such incredible games at the moment. Stardock is sort of kicking things on. Paradox. Now we've got Hooded Horse as well. There's some big studios or big publishing, or medium to large size publishers that are really looking after our genre, which is fantastic.
Hooded Horses almost seem to have come out of nowhere as well. I mean, they're a relatively new company. Yeah, it's an interesting thing that they've got. They've got a lot of games. That Workers and Resources is an amazing game, by the way. I don't know if you've played that. If you like city builder games, it's on the complex side of the city builder, but it's pretty good. Yeah, Xenonauts 2. Richard was talking about Xenonauts 2. That's a really good game. And again, I'm waiting for it to be finished. I want that game to be finished.
Well, it sort of is now, Ben. It's you've actually now got it's now got the end game in it, but they're still going to keep on developing it. So
so it's done.
It's not done. But they now have the final battleships are in there in terms of the alien battleships. So they're still. I really like what they've done with the progression of it. To be honest, they had like a roadmap, and they decided to veer off the road and go down a side street just to fix the little things that people were actually concerned about, And so they actually, instead of progressing the story, which is why people have been waiting for it, they decided to make the existing game as good as it could possibly be. And that's really worked well, I think. And now they've got to the point where they've put all the content in there, but they're still going to keep on putting more and more polish into it. So I think the progression of it, I'm really, really happy with that game. I mean, Richard was gushing about it as well. He was giggling about it.
I've got to say, just an honourable mention of good publishers as well. I'll just put in the chat. Micropose is definitely up there as well. I mean, I've got to say thank you for David, who gives me a lot of the games from the publisher. And I got to say, there's like Regiment, and there's, for you, Grognard, real-time war strategy gamers, Sea Power, which I have ventured into, and I tell you now, you want a mind boggle. If you're a command, I would recommend, of course, picking up Sea Power, because it is so intense. You have to be a weaponologist of some description or ex-military to understand a lot of the statistics, and of course weapon stats is just push. I mean, I like to think I have a good grasp on military equipment, but I feel like I say this all the time, and people probably I am a keen amateur, but it is just like a drop in the ocean. You need to put hours into this game, but that's the rewarding part of that game, is putting the hours into it. Once you learn it, you're like, if you don't know which missiles are air to sea or air to ground, don't touch it. But like I said, if you want to, please do, and you'll be rewarded in the end. But it is just, I don't know if any of you guys here have ventured into Sea Power, or even the command operation stuff.
Played Command, I've got that one. That's a really good game. It's one of those that looks really intimidating, but when you actually take the plunge and put it, it's like Dominions. Like, it looks intimidating when you start playing it, but when you actually get into it, it starts to unveil layers of complexity in a way that is just enthralling for that. If you've got that kind of mind, I've heard nothing but good things about Sea Power.
I think
was talking about
Sea
it the other
Power's
day.
got a really good visuals too. Like, so it
Yeah.
actually sort of, it's not overwhelming either. I haven't played a lot of it. It's a game I do want to play a lot in 2025. But yeah, I'm 100% with what Richard's saying about micropros. I mean, you do a podcast just on micropros, actually the resurrection of micropros, it's like the zombie that's come back.
Maybe we should do that.
And just picked up from where they like this. It's such a great story. And
High
Sea
Fleet,
Power,
man. High Fleet and
What's that?
Carrier
Oh,
Climb 2 are
Fleet.
both really good games.
I love that game. And I've been playing heaps of Regiments too. They put out a DLC this year, and that's excellent. It's kind of like War Game, but you don't die in 20 seconds without knowing what happened to you. So it's a little more forgiving, a little easier to pick up, because I tried War Game. And
there's
I
like an
couldn't really get into it.
escalation. When I play Regiments, I feel like it's an escalation in the gameplay when you're playing it as a pace, like a what's the word, a pulse even for the game when you're playing it. And I recommend Regiments as well for people who like, of course, 80s fighting with T-55s and stuff.
Yeah, oh, it's great. And it'd be like, you've got your recon and you're sneaking through the forest, and you're thinking, yeah, I'm doing well, I'm going for this point. Then you'd have this oh shit moment where like 6 T-55s come out of nowhere, and then you've got it's almost like World in Conflict too. You've got your off-map call-ins with your artillery strikes and airstrikes and that sort of thing. Oh, it's incredible. It's good. All right, I'll shut up about that.
We're going into the down the Wargamer rabbit hole now. There was also Armored Brigade 2 that was released this year. I've not played it yet, but I know Daz has been playing it, and I know Richard will probably be playing it too. What's your verdict on that, just out of interest?
Do you want me to go first, Daz, or do you want to take the line?
You go first, Richard. I've been speaking an awful lot.
From the top-down view and the isometric view of the original game, I got to say I really enjoy it. I cannot speak highly of it, and I got quite a big preview copy of Armored Brigade 2, and I literally played it, and then guess what? I just played it some more. And the versatile, it's the depth of the game. And I know there's people who are creating maps for this game. There's all sorts of stats you can change with it, air power and all the rest of it, and it is so amazing. That 3D view they've changed it blows your mind, and it just makes the game, it just feels the evolution of the game from the number one just even better. And like I said, because I don't know, depending on what kind of war gamer you are, do you like just the top-down view, or do you want more of a 3D view? For me, visually, the 3D view was the best thing they could do. And of course, without going in too much depth, you can customize your own maps. You can make maps as big as you want, small as you want. You can have infantry bouts. You can have tank clashes. You can put as many planes as helicopters in there as possible. And then, like I said, I think the key word I like to use now for quite recently is pin to a game if you like. Even if you're a beginner, you can drop into it, and you may not understand 100% of the stuff that's going off, but you've got a fair idea, and then you can just pick it up. So even probably the most amateur to the most expert wargamer, but then you come down to a little bit, and this is which I probably picked up on Command and Sea Power. You tend to find people are, they have some military understanding, or they have, served in the military, and they have some grasp of their military aspects of the weapons and stuff. And this is what I find, especially producing content for this game. You get a lot of ex-military people do comment on your video saying, you shouldn't have really done that. We should do this with this tank, or et cetera, et cetera. But like on a synopsis, it is a good game. It's a really good game. And if you like that 80s style of Cold War got hot, it is literally the game for you. And a really good price tag for the game as well. And probably the main thing I want to say, just like we spoke with Gladius, there's replayability in there as well. You can jump into as many variations of a map, objectives, and the customization is just what makes me just keep coming back to it, thinking, oh, I'd like to fight a very narrow battlefield or a very long battlefield, etc. So it gives you that I can change things, and of course, like you can. And before I hand over to Daz, it's one thing. The maps are fantastic because they are real maps. They aren't just a battlefield somewhere. It's somewhere in the world you can fight, or because, like I said, the people generating maps from actual height degradations, etc., etc.
Let me just explain this, because the original Armored Brigade was amazing because, like Richard's saying, it's not procedurally generated, but they use real topographical maps, and then when you set up a game, you take a slice of the map that you want to play on, so you can have like a very small map or a very large one. Now, the original game was a 2D game. It was top-down 2D sprites. I liked that, and I was very concerned when I saw Armored Brigade 2 was going to 3D, because I kind of thought that they'd be ditching this amazing map system. That was the best thing about that game, was this the way that you can just have endless content yet from real game maps, right? It was genius. Very, very well done. But Armored Brigade 2, they've brought the system back. It's still there, but they've just translated it into 3D now, so you can actually get in amongst all the troops that are fighting on the ground. It does look really cool. I don't have a copy of this yet. I will be buying it though. I thought Armored Brigade 1 was one of the best war games I've played in years. And I like the Cold War era as well. It's really interesting.
Actually,
Can
maybe
I
even
ask you a
just explain it
question?
a little bit more. Sorry, Lucid, go ahead.
Oh, we might be asking the same question, Daz, but is it like a grand strategy game where you're producing units and you have to determine what
No,
type, or is it more like there's a scenario
no, it's a
It's
scenario-based
you
game
get this?
or a
the
sandbox-based
way
game. So you can pick sides, you get points value, and you're like, okay, I want to have, tank
Okay.
brigade, I want a bunch of
But
units, and then
maybe
you
if
pick.
just to try to explain a little bit more what Ben was saying about the maps, it sounds like with most games when you've got like a map, you think that you're still playing on the majority of the map. Now this thing comes with all the DLCs that were released previously are part of the base game in this one, and so you've got like 7 or 8 of these massive maps, and so when you play a campaign, you build a battlefield in one little corner of the map, and then build another with the endpoint, and it will then make all the different maps in between. So you end up playing on these monstrously big maps, and then you're playing very small battles along the actual real map. So it's very, very different. So when you sort of talk about there being all these curated maps, you're playing such a small little portion on these actual curated maps, and then it extends on. But the way it works is you end up having like a core group, and as you play a campaign, the core group then you have to then manage. So you don't build the equipment, but you can buy new equipment in the campaigns. And so the campaigns, there are proper campaigns, but there's also these these generated campaigns I just find so fascinating. You can come into a thing where you're playing on plains that then ends up into sort of like wooded and mountain regions in a real environment, and then come down into a river valley, and somehow you've got to get across the river on a different map. So as you're playing each actual progression through the campaign, it's sort of like a tug of war where you start off in the middle, and if you win, you then go to the next map along. If you lose, you then may go back 1 or 2 maps. And so until you get back to the headquarters of whichever team you're playing against, it's fascinating to sort of see. And it was sort of funny, what Ben said as well, like if I can just reiterate, everything Richard said, I agree 100%. It's such an amazing game, this game. I think it came 4th in my game of the year this year, just with what it does do. But the thing that I was really not looking forward to this game, I thought this was going to be a real dud because it uses tiles. It just uses squares to basically position the actual units. And when I saw the advanced stuff for it, I thought, it's just going to be so basic. It's just going to be crazy. But that's not the way it works. It actually sort of, the units, when they move into one of those tiles, so you still designate where it's going to go. They will then try to find the best position. They'll actually sort of dig in. They'll do different things like that as well. So you're giving it an order to move to a place, but it will then find the best place. It's not just sitting as a unit in an actual pixel or in a tile. It actually goes well beyond that. And that for me also was the thing. It went from one of my least anticipated games for last year. Like I forget where I had it in my rating, but it was very, very low because of what I saw with the tiles, up to being one of the best games I played in 2024. Now, having said that, when you see the release date says 2025. At the moment, you can only buy the game through the Matrix and Slytherin stores, but it will be coming to Steam. And if you do buy it through the Matrix stores, you can then get a Steam key with that as well for when it does get released. But it's just an amazingly good game, like as Richard said.
All right, I could probably go next with the game I probably had most fun playing, and that would probably have to be Factorio with I think the Space Age DLC really was like a new game. Though there's some funny. Who of y'all have played it, by the way?
I have played the Factorio.
Has everybody played Factorio?
I've played Factorio as well. Yeah, I like it.
I've played the original.
I didn't love it, but I like it.
I've got a friend actually who actually plays the new Space Age. He says it's just mind-blowingly good.
Yeah, it's crazy. There's some interesting statistics. Let me see if I can find it here. See, how do I get to?
I think, Ben,
see
you got me a
achievements
copy.
in the
It's
achievement?
in my library. I swear it's installed. I just haven't touched it yet.
Well,
I loved the time
apparently
I had
most
with it,
people
but
have
I didn't
played
play it
it.
for long. The only reason is because it's too addictive. I've put it on. I've put it on my list of games that I don't dare play because it will just swallow my life up. Basically, it's just
Mm.
it's it. You know, if you've got the good autism, this is going to be a game for you.
I'm shocked. I'm shocked you have a life, Ben. To be honest with you.
Well, you know,
Yeah.
I do come from Derby, I guess, and it's difficult for us to have real human being lives.
Yeah. So there are a few I think there's some really interesting things about this. So first of all, to access the DLC, you basically have to almost beat the original game. So that's kind of strange because a lot of people don't beat games, especially a game like Factorio. But they changed it so that the finish line for the first game is kind of like moved forward. So it's like a lot easier to get to space. And then when you get to space, you can go to these other planets, which, as you can see from the video, are completely nuts. Like this huge worm is piling through your base. And they're all the planets. They had one of the main mod makers. I forget, they made some crazy mods. I forget the name of them, but for the original Factorio, they made all these mods. They hired them, and then they were a key part of the key kind of design group for the space age mod. And so every time you go to a new planet, things can get turned on their head. So Factorio, the base game, is a game where you're taking all of these raw components and you're building them up to basically be more advanced components so that you can put things together and build your base. Well, there's like a planet where you go to, well, now there's like littered advanced components. So you have tons of those, but you have to deconstruct them to like mine the resources out, basically like recycling, like try to mine resources out of these big junk heaps. Anyway, there's just so many cool things. I had a ton of fun playing it. I think the other thing that I wanted to just mention about Factorio is because I think this is relevant to a lot of strategy games, is that Factorio handles scale really well. So you can probably think of a lot of games. Like I'm thinking like some of the old Age of Wonders games, like when you're building cities and you have like 20 cities and then you have a bunch of, 100 units and you just want to give up, right? Because some games are not made to handle scale well.
Hang on, this is sacrilegious, Lucid, just letting you know. You never ever say anything negative about Age of Wonders while I'm in the room. Thank you.
Oh, I love Age of Wonders too, but we'll have that. I'm looking forward to talking about. I've gone back and played it like 30 more hours just so that we could have like a informed discussion, so that I wouldn't be talking out of my arse. But
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that one too. I made it another 3 hours and then I was fed up with it.
But no, I went back and played it a lot. I was like trying to find the fun. And there are cool things. There are a lot of things. I mean, I don't want to go talk about Age of Wonders 4, though we will do a whole podcast on it. But it is a game I can tell was made with a lot of love. But I just can't fall in love with it.
Yeah, that's exactly how I feel. I could recognize it's a good game. It's very popular. The people who love it. I just can't get into it.
I can't be listening to this, guys. I can't be listening to this.
Yeah.
I've got to say,
okay, but what I wanted
Age of Wonders 4 was my favorite year of the game. Favorite game of the year, but it wasn't my best game of the year, if that makes sense. Anyway, sorry, I won't. I'll just go back into my corner.
Well, the point I wanted to make was that Factorio handles scale so well. So it's like just when an activity starts getting annoying, like once you've scaled up so you're doing so much of this thing that it would be frustrating and annoying, there's like a whole paradigm shift where now you can do this thing in a different way. And that new way is fun and interesting. Like eventually you get to blueprints and then you have little construction robots that builds things for you. And then you're like going to space and it's really expensive to get resources up there. So you're not managing as many of them. It's very cool. And then when you go to a new planet, it's kind of a resource reset as well. But
that was a paradigm. Sorry, that was right that element was in the game right from the start, because you have to manually mine everything, don't you? When you start Factorio, you have to literally with your hand kind of dig like you play Minecraft.
And then you get your first miner. When you get your first miner in Factorio, you're like, oh God, or you have like 3 miners set up and then they feed into each other and then they are like smelting the ore and you're getting free ore. Yeah. All the way smelted down to little metal plates. You're like, oh, so good.
So now I can imagine.
And then when you're getting 1 million per turn, that feels really good.
All I'm hearing is we all need to play this together. and rage at each other.
This,
all it
by
is.
the way, this is another thing. It is one of the best multiplayer strategy games. Like
Is it?
you get on a team together and you're building up this base. And, it's a little bit like an engineering environment where everybody has their own way they do things and they hate how everybody else does things. So it's like people are designing their own thing as like a fractal, but it still has to like work together. It's a ton of fun.
So it's basically like a really advanced version of that time I tried to build a train set with my son and he got mad at me because I did it wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, cool. I'm down. Let's do it. Yep.
That's why I was actually,
Except-
when you say that, Shaun, because I'd said, like my experience with Factorio has been one of frustration. And so when Lucid was actually sort of saying that it doesn't sort of get grindy, I actually found the opposite with the original game.
Well, you know what, Des? We should do a multiplayer game with the 5 of us and just like try to get to space. It's hilarious. I mean, some of it is there's a learning curve. You have to like learn how things fit together.
That's going to be like
But-
herding cats, man.
Meow.
So
Oh,
with
it
the
is.
5 of us,
It's going to be chaos.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
I was
Race
gonna say
chaos.
too, it's like building a train set with your son where your son gets mad at you, except in this case, you accidentally depower your whole base and then the biters destroy half of it.
I do
But,
like
yeah.
that they've managed to introduce pressure into a city builder sandbox game essentially. Because I like city builders, but when there's no pressure, I get bored really fast. Now, the pressure can come from complexity, like it does in a game like Workers and Resources, Soviet Republic. That game is kind of difficult because there's just so much to it. But I think a better way of introducing, I mean, Factorio is kind of a tower defense game as well, isn't it? You've got to constantly guard your holdings from these things that are invading, and I think that pressure makes it compelling. Does the pressure ramp up in terms of what attacks you? I forget now. I think it does, doesn't it? Kind of you get more and more
This
of the
this
monsters.
actually, I'm glad you mentioned this because I think, especially if we have developers that are watching this, I think that's one of the coolest things that doesn't like hit you in the face when you see Factorio, but it's actually one of the coolest behind the scenes mechanics. And I didn't even notice it. My buddy, who is my partner in the game I'm working on, noticed it. And basically, the way enemies spawn is entirely based on pollution. And pollution, like if you stopped mining and stopped doing anything in your base, you stop generating pollution. So the scale of enemy attacks is based on how much pollution you produce. And you can do things to like reduce pollution. You make solar panels instead of coal factories. You can do the other things that are going to like lower the amount of biter attacks that you get. And there's some things that aren't related to just your activity. Like as time goes on, the biters evolve a bit. But it's a really interesting way where you always, even though it's like a sandbox mode, you feel like you're in a sandbox playing this game. You always feel like there's a lot of pressure, like, oh shit, I've got to upgrade this thing. And especially if you put it on like Death World or some of the more advanced settings.
Do you
there's
guys
a lot
enjoy
of
that
pressure.
though? I actually find the opposite. I find that if I'm doing a city builder, I hate I hate things like the sort of like, what is it, tornadoes or
You
manual
played Dwarf
towers.
Fortress. You're a liar, Daz. I know this is
No,
not
that's
true.
That's
Out of all of
completely
the
different.
city builder games that you play that you could possibly be frustrated by, Dwarf Fortress is the one. It's the number one
No,
with those
no.
fucking things that
I'm
come
going to
through
have
them.
to block my ears again. Sorry, Ben. This is you're now just baiting me.
I think I'm kind of like that in that regard. Like if I'm playing something like, say, Anno, I mean, it's not a pure city builder really, but when I'm playing something like that, I tend to try and turn off all the offensive stuff because I don't like having to deal with military conflict and stuff in my city builders. I like to just really focus on the building and making it look pretty and making sure everything's efficient and that kind of thing. And I feel like having other stuff distracts from that. So I think I'm with Daz on that
it
one.
changes the experience, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
I don't mind having military. I just don't like having random crap come in and just and create fires or fires in the old Caesar games used to just I hated it. Absolutely hated it.
Well, this for
Yeah.
Factorio, it's not random. You won't get attacked at all at the beginning because if you hit tab to look at the map, you can see where pollution is spread to, and pollution gets like a red color. And if there's no red on like a biter camp, it will never spawn to attack you. So if you keep checking in on that, you can see like, okay, we're probably going to get attacked in like 10 minutes because the pollution's getting close to the spider camp. So it is predictable and it's not random. Like you won't have the size of the attacks will be proportional to your economy, basically. And the default that most people play on, like unless they're playing on like Death World or something, is pretty easy. Like the military part is like kind of just enough to keep you nimble. It's not an overwhelming portion. You spend 90% of your time building your base and 10% of your time protecting it. But if you play on Death World, you spend probably like 70% of your time defending yourself and maybe 30% building your base. And that feels like you're playing a tower defense more than you know.
You're making me
I'd
want
be
to play
interested to
this
see
now.
what you think of games like Cataclysmo, actually. Because I'm trying to in my head, I'm thinking, I hate having those things happen in a city builder, but yet Cataclysmo is a city builder
Yeah.
with a lot of attacks coming in. So yeah, I think like in the sense of Cataclysmo, you know when the attack's going to come. Whereas I found in Factorio, you just didn't know. And I tend to be very laser focused on what I'm looking at on the screen. I don't see the stuff on the periphery. And so it's sort of one of those things where I often find, damn, it's already too late. And it was a long time ago that I played Factorio, but I got frustrated with it.
I was
Well, you know what?
surprised
I
about
think
that, Daz.
within
I
that,
thought you'd
Daz,
like
is a
that
great
game.
point.
Sorry.
I think within that, you have a great point. I think so you can look at the map, but as a new player, if you haven't played 20 hours, you probably won't know that. And that's enough time to give up on the game. And I think what they should do is they should make it so when a camp is starting to warm up, like pollution has reached a camp, they would have like an alert that pops up and it would like ping you to the map where, the first spawn group is starting there. So it's one of the cool things, like in Slay the Spire, you can see what the enemy's going to do. And I think in general, when the game tells you what you're about to have to fight, it feels so much better than when it feels like it's random or it just comes at you randomly. Like you should know what's coming at you.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. Yep. Maybe we're going to give that another go, actually.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm surprised I thought that you'd be right up your alley, actually, Daz, because you really like those kind of games where you've got to learn technical intricacies of mechanics and stuff. So I was surprised to hear that you were a big fan.
It's not so much that, like, comparing it to, say, Dwarf Fortress, like, it's just completely different for me. Like, it's, Factorio, you're still starting on the same sort of world each time. If Dwarf Fortress always started in a forest every single time, that would be boring. But it's the difference with Dwarf Fortress is you've got to overcome the world building, whereas Factorio, I don't think you do. So that would be for me the thing that inspires me with a game like with Dwarf Fortress and with Shadow Empire is the world building aspect as much as the actual game. In fact, probably even more so than the game.
Yeah, well said. So who's next? For talking about games, have we all had a turn? Richard
didn't.
Go ahead.
All right.
I think you did.
Did I? I'm going to say anyway.
Okay, go for it.
So a little.
we talk about armor related stuff. Yeah.
Like 2024 kind of game of the year, and this is not going to come a shock to Ben or Daz. It's got to be my top game is probably Field of Glory Kingdoms, which I still have not put enough hours into, and it's
you can never put enough hours into it.
You see, I think this came off a conversation from Ben ages ago. How many hours do you have to put into a game to actually fully understand the game? And I don't fully understand the game still after probably 100 hours of it. There's still stuff I don't. And I think Daz is on the Steam page as the video as well currently.
Yeah.
I'm literally, it's just as you got, people know me, the games I play, of course, originate from Field of Glory, lots of ancient games, medieval games, and just the whole push into Field of Glory Kingdoms for me was amazing. And especially Ageard as well, being, of course, the developers, it is just that amazing, journey from, of course, the ancient game into the Field of Glory Empires game as well. It's just such a good, I think we'll probably Steam store, the politics, the religion, the diplomacy, of course, the cultural wars between different nations is such a big system, and of course with your lineage of your faction, whoever you're playing as well, and how good the ears are, I could speak for ages on it, and I probably wouldn't do it right for it. So, but I'm trying a way to describe Field of Glory Kingdoms, a grand Crusader Kings. We're not Crusader Kings. We're still before Crusader Kings. We've still got a little bit of lineage and who's our relations, but we're not marrying people, but we've got like such a grand thing. And like I said, if you are interested in like, medieval Europe, and of course, you got your jihads and your holy wars. You of course got the historic things that happened, like Normans coming to England, and of course the main thing, of course, which always excites me, is the export version to medieval, which the exact same thing they did for Empires. If you're not, well, please do Google this game and go on Steam and check it out as well, because it is just a game and it has another game inside it as well. Would everybody agree on that here?
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
100%.
Field of Glory Empires was the game that came before. AGR are a seasoned grand strategy game developer. They make turn-based strategy games. So this is like, it plays. Field of Glory Empires was my favorite grand strategy game. I way prefer it over any of the Paradox games. Paradox games are quite simplistic in terms of they're usually just about pushing numbers around. Where you know what I mean, right? It's kind of like number one game
pops.
design.
They're called pops.
Yeah, right. You just push numbers around basically. You do certain events. It makes someone like you more. Blah blah blah. They're fun, engaging games. But Field of Glory, Field of Glory Empires was a really mechanically rich game with an incredibly clever take on that kind of genre. So had this really cool thing where instead of like when you go to develop an area, what do you call it, like a province, rather than having the standard 4X thing like Civ, where it's like, oh, you can build a granary or you can build a market, it had a randomized building system. So when it came time to be able to build in a province, it gave you basically a random roll as to what you can build there, and then you pick something from a building chain, and then that would then influence the other buildings that could be built. So every damn game was so replayable because this random building system is absolutely genius. It also had one of the best trade systems I've ever seen implemented in a game. It looked complex, but it was actually really simple, and yet. So the way that it would work is the provinces would have a natural material, and then you would be able to develop that natural resource. Say if you got silk, for example, you build a silk production building, and then that material silk might be used as a secondary resource for your other regions. So if you didn't have access to silk, you had buildings that needed it as a second resource, you could actually trade it in from other people, and that kind of attracted trade into your empire. So it was really cool because you would want to take certain provinces so that you had access to these natural resources, not just because it strengthened your empire, but because it also enabled you to get better trade, basically. So it was an incredibly clever game.
That's Empire's Kingdom doesn't have that.
No, I know that, and that's why I was disappointed to hear that, because I was.
Oh, really?
Because I was really disappointed because I thought that was Empire's cleverest. That was its cleverest mechanic. However, I've heard that Field of Glory Kingdom. I bought the game. I've not played it yet. I've just not had a chance because I know just what Richard said. It's going to be 100 hours before I really start getting my head around it. The only other point I want to make before I hand it over to you guys is that I still feel that Slytherin are making a mistake, kind of really pushing the Field of Glory tactical battle system as hard as they do. I really, because every single time that I've played that game, on whether it's on YouTube or on a like in a series, or whether it's a live stream, I get people going, oh, I really wanted to buy this, but I didn't like that I had to buy 2 games to be able to enjoy it. And I was like, no. That was such a mistake the marketing team made, right? You don't need Field of Glory to be able to play Field of Glory Kingdoms or Empires. You don't need it. It's got a perfectly good combat system as it is. In fact, I never bother exporting the battles. I just don't bother. It's just too time consuming. Whereas I know Richard and Daz love to. But so if you're looking at this game, don't feel that you have to buy both games. You don't need to. And they're both amazing games, and they're both well worth owning. Like Field of Glory 2 is a fucking brilliant game. It's one of the best tactics games I've ever played, but it's totally separate from the strategic game. So yeah, that's what I would say. I'm looking forward to playing this in the new year. I've actually just reinstalled it, and I'm quite hyped up to play it now, having heard Richard talk about it.
I think like what you're saying, Ben, I think is bullshit. But anyway, no, but I do think that it's simpler it's simpler to grasp than Empires was. I think they've learned lessons from Empires, and it's not just the trade, but there's a lot of things I still think that there's, and I don't know if I don't think I agree with you about the needing to have the two games. I would love to have it all compressed into one game. So you've got the tactical battle system and the sort of like the quick game as well. Like it's got sort of like an auto battle system, which is determined essentially like, sort of, it's like a WeGo system. So if that gets played out like Dominions or any of the other games, but in this case, you've got a WeGo system inside kingdoms, it's Field of Glory Kingdoms, and then but if you want to play the battle out, you can export it out to Field of Glory Medieval and then play the battle in tactical. And I like having that option, but I wish it was. I agree with you. I wish it was all in one game. But the thing that strikes me for the game where like with what Richard was saying as well, where even after 100 hours or so, you still don't really, you're still finding things. You're thinking, how the hell does that, like, how did that work? And it's sort of like an example was, I was playing it the other day and ended up with an enemy army started to march towards my territory. And then all of a sudden, one of the provinces, but as its build queue actually had a one turn build quick walls, like building that could actually build in a single turn. I'd never seen that before in the game. And when I looked into it, and it was actually, because the populace were scared of what was of the threat that was coming, they presented an option for me to then be able to build something to delay the enemy as they hit that province, and I could then bring my army down to sort of meet with them. And and it only lasted for a few turns. Like the actual walls that they put up were temporary walls, but the fact that the game had that in it wasn't said anywhere. And I think it's the fact that it wasn't actually said anywhere in the game that that's a factor that may kick in is disappointing for me. Like, because I'm thinking that's the sort of stuff that players like to know. Like there's so much that goes on under the hood with the Field of Glory Kingdoms and Field of Glory Empires as well, that you end up with all these mechanics that may appear random, but they're not. They're actually all based on incredibly intricate gaming systems, which is what AGO just does so well. So, and I find that that's an opportunity that I wish that was more exposed for the player to sort of to know this is what's going on. But I love the game. I like, with what Richard's sort of saying as well. I think it's an incredible game. But yeah, it's just that I just think that I don't think they've done a good job of really explaining just how the interweaving of the different game mechanics actually does play with the game.
Just one little kudos. I know we've spoke about why top game, but just one little kudos. What happened? I think it was this year. Was the combat mission series actually being adopted onto Steam? I mean, I know for you grognard games out there who like I've discussed further previously in this about Sea Power, about these militaristic games. Combat missions coming to Steam is by far the one of my other highlights. Bringing such a complex, say, military simulation game to Steam, and making it so much more accessible for the Battlefront guys. Because that for me is literally, I kid you not, guys. When I heard that was happening, I just shot up massively. I don't know how well. I know a couple of you guys on here. I've probably played a couple of the combat missions, but they are just so immersive. And I recommend anybody who's interested in that kind of level of gameplay, please check it out. It is just like I said, probably we looked at Dominion's graphics, and you look at graphics and gameplay. I love gameplay over graphics a million times. The same thing when you look at some of the combat mission games. The engine might not be the most updated engine, but the gameplay is absolutely surreal. And you will come back again and again and again. And I think I have combination of hundreds of hours in these games. And like I said before, I'm currently still a keen amateur on it, but I don't mind losing because I'm actually really enjoying being there.
Yeah, I agree with you, Richard. I think the thing with combat mission, which really sets it apart, every single bullet is modeled, and not just the individual bullet, but the speed it goes through the air. It's got a natural dip. Everything is actually like like all the physics in combat mission is just 100%. Like you hit a tank at exactly a certain point, and it's going to do different things depending on how accurate the shot actually is. It's just an amazing game. I agree with you 100% with that one.
It's like I try not to speak ill of a game, but I appreciate the price tag for them games can be quite high. But I will let you know it is worth it. If you don't get it on a sale and you still really want to buy it, it is still worth the full price. And I very rarely say that about a game sometimes, where actually the full price is a good price for that game. Like, really recommend it.
Yeah, they're really replayable as well. I've got I got a couple of the combat mission games from Slytherin to do some promo stuff when I was working with Explorminate, and I would pay 50 quid for one of those. They are so replayable. If you like tactics war games, they I feel like I've never been in a real battle, right? My brothers was in the army, but like I never did that. I didn't do the military path. But I would expect that this is about as realistic as you get in terms of, squad level combat. It's really detailed. Like Daz says, the simulation is down. The graphics aren't as bad as they're making out either. They're functional, and so I think the combat mission games are, yeah, they're probably some of the best. They're probably some of the best war games I've ever played. I
It's
know
funny you say that,
Tortuga Pan's a big
sorry,
fan.
Ben. Ben, if I can just reiterate the point that you made there, like it's actually, I'm pretty sure that the combat mission games have got like there's a gamer version and a professional version, and they actually use the combat mission professional version for NATO forces to train officers on giving orders and how orders are perceived because it's so realistic.
Yeah, it's the same with Command Modern Operations as well. That's another ridiculously realistic game where they have a military version as well that they contract out to the US government and that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's super realistic. They're really good fun games. They are if you put a little bit of time into learning the user interface and the way that it works, because it is a little complex to get your head around at first. But once you start learning it, they are really really good fun. Like you can just play the same mission over and over and over and over and get different results out of it each time. It's just really good.
Yeah, I'll just say one thing. We probably need to wrap up. But one thing I do like about it, just looking at it from the trailer, I haven't played it, but it looks very high lethality. It doesn't, combat soldiers
Without a
aren't
doubt.
500 HP
Oh, yeah.
guys that take 40 hits.
Yeah,
If you can see
it's
it
very
anyway, it
realistic.
dies.
There, the toast.
Especially the
People
Cold
die.
War era stuff. If you can see, the rule is if you can see something, it's going to die. So it's all about maintaining stealth, throwing down smoke, to cover maneuver, putting fire onto enemy troops in order to suppress them so that you can flank them. It's super tactical. It's just real. It's realistic. It's like real military stuff. So yeah, it's definitely worth a look if you are interested in what in real world military stuff. And like Richard would say, you need to know the weapon systems. I actually one of what got me into war games. In fact, sorry, I got into war games and then I kind of deviated away from playing war games because I spent more time researching what all the fucking stuff was, like the weapon systems, the history of all the different battalions. And
Yeah, it's
it
fun.
took me down it takes you down a YouTube rabbit hole, or you go like reading books. Like I bought books on the Napoleonic War because I got really into a Napoleonic War game I was playing, and then I spent ages and ages just researching it. So that's why these games are so great. They're a window into the past, and you can learn a lot about real life stuff from just playing them.
Actually, one thing that's going to be interesting is
that is
how this game actually is, like how games like Combat Mission compares ultimately with Broken Arrow, which is coming out this year. I actually think that Combat Mission has got so much more depth to it, personally. I've only played a little bit of Broken Arrow, but while Broken Arrow looks great, I think that still Combat Mission for me is still the game that I would prefer to be playing. I don't know if any of you guys have played the demos for Broken Arrow.
Yeah, I haven't played Combat Mission, but I've played Broken Arrow, and I'm not sure. I don't think they're targeting the same audience anyway. They're targeting more of like your Warno war game, like that kind of audience, rather than something really deep like Combat Mission. So yeah, no, I get where you're coming from there.
The Slytherin games are mostly, they're mostly played by ex-military people. That's why, what Richard was saying is true. If you play any of these games on YouTube as a content creator, you will get people who have actually been in the military, kind of correcting you on your tactics, or, on a mistake that you made, with misnaming a battalion here and there. So it's really interesting in that respect as well, because you get people who really know what they're talking about with this stuff coming in and kind of helping you out. And it's one of those games where I really like having backseat gamers as well, because they really teach you how to play the game properly.
one thing I like about, to come back to the high lethality again, is I feel like the idea of a lot of strategy games devolving into effective HP tanks and DPS generators is really kind of bad. I think a lot of modern game designers try to like simplify things right? So that like, oh, it's plus 10 bonus here and a 20% bonus here and a 20% bonus versus cav or something. I think that's kind of cancer game design that makes for not very interesting things to play. And in this, kind of the way you guys are talking about it, again, I haven't played this game, but it seems like there's a ton of variety in terms of how things suppress troops and like how accurate things are and, armor penetration values and things like that. Like some tanks are just immune to certain weapons, but they're very unimmune to other kinds of weapons. So I think those things all make for like super interesting gameplay. And the things you were describing about like laying cover fire so you can flank and, root people out of position. All those things sound really interesting.
Especially on the
I think that
sorry, Lucid, on the later combat missions as well. When you look at modular and the different optics tanks have as well, it, like Ben said, it is literally a rabbit hole. You talk about tanks that have thermals, have different kind of optics, shells, etc. It's like literally,
Yeah.
you have to sit there with an encyclopedia on tanks and what will penetrate what will see what at range, what ATGM ranges and penetrations, and is it wire guided? Is it laser guided?
Yeah.
So
One of the
I
things.
think
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Lisa.
so. I think that part of the interesting thing, I think, the point I'm kind of going for is that I think realism serves to inspire really interesting, nuanced gameplay where it's not just like DPS generators and HP tanks, because that's not how the real world is. And so these like actual combat sims have a lot of these really cool strategy mechanics that are really interesting to engage with. I think for me, the problem, because I don't know a bunch of, like, I don't know the names of the guns. I don't know the names of the tanks. I don't know the names of like the divisions. I don't know any of the things. I think the one thing that would be nice as a somewhat amateur, and maybe they have done this for them to gamify, is like to have really easy tooltips that explain everything, like in a short blurb.
You've actually
You won't
got
get
that
that
in
in combat mission.
They do.
I
Okay.
mean, no, every unit's got that. Every unit actually does have
Okay.
that. It's got
Oh,
like a
does it?
full on. It's actually got the different types of weaponry. It's got like a matrix for every type of bullet that you've got, every type of shell that you're firing from a tank. It actually shows you like if you're typically hitting front armor, top armor, side, rear, things like that, what sort of penetration you're going to get in a very, very succinct way. So in that sense, it actually works pretty well.
That's caught me
Cool
talking
then.
bollocks.
The way
again.
they were describing these rabbit holes, I was like, I don't have time to like discover what wire. I don't even know what Richard was saying. Wire something.
ATGM
thermals
for
on.
everybody.
I have to research this before I can play the
Faust.
game.
I'm going to
What's
say
going
random
on
number
here?
now.
So you can play with a handful of units and play a full game with just like, 7 or 8 units, which means that you don't have a real lot to learn. Like there are massive ones. I don't like playing the big ones. I like playing the small, like, where every single loss that you have is going to hurt you a hell of a lot. So you can play it all sorts of different ways. But it's not overwhelming. Like it really isn't in terms of learning what the different units actually end up doing. It's more about like, how you position your units and actually how how you sort of get infantry, like whether you run across an area of terrain or whether you sneak across that area of terrain, things like that, or whether you put smoke down. There's a lot of stuff along those aspects. So no, it's not overwhelming. So don't feel that the game it's very, very deep and rich and it models things incredibly well, but it's not actually overwhelming.
Yeah, I agree with that. The tutorials are really good as well.
All right, so let's wrap up. I know we're going to talk a bit about what future episodes we're going to bring. So I know we were originally planning on doing 3 things in this podcast, but Daz wisely predicted that we would run out of time and would only have time to do one of those. So we were going to talk about what were some of our favorite games from 2024, what were some of the duds and failures of 2024 in terms of studios and games. So that will be a separate episode probably. And then some of the things we're most looking forward to in 2025 from games. So that will probably be a separate episode. But we also had 2 other things. One of them, Daz and I have already hinted at coming up, and that is going to be Age of Wonders 4. And I think there are very strong opinions by different people in here, but I think there's also a lot of common ground. So that'll be a really interesting discussion too.
Yeah, we're going to give it a fair shake. I mean, I've been kind of publicly critical about Age of Wonders 4, but my criticism comes from wanting it to be an amazing game because I got massive respect for Triumph. I think they're a really great developer.
And
They're
there
really
it is.
nice people.
Your wish has come true, Ben. It is an amazingly good game.
It is a really good game. It's just not for me.
This is gonna be a fun one. That
Yeah, it's gonna
if
be
y'all are
fun.
wondering which one to tune into the Age of Wonders 4 one. So that's gonna be good. And then Path of Exile 2, I think we're gonna do an episode on that. It's been that was such a huge game. So many people have played it when it came out. It's nuts. But it'll be fun to talk about some of the mechanics in there too.
Yeah, and I think we're
As
going
well
to
as
get
just
Rob from
general
Explorminate
beats.
and Drexy on that one as well, because it'd be good to get Rob on. Rob's agreed to come on the show, which is really, really good. So it'll be a bit of a mixing of the old Explorminate crew with the meta abuse guys. So that's going to be fun, man. And Rob and Drexy both really like hack and slash games. I'm less into them, to be honest. So I think that's going to be an episode where I'm going to be, kind of listening more than talking. I haven't played Path of Exile 2 a whole lot, to be honest, and I've stopped playing it already. So that might tell you something about how I feel about it. It's not that it's a bad game. It's just, again, it's just not for me, I don't think. But I do recognize that it, for the kind of game it is, it's looking like it's doing a lot of right things.
All right, so I think that's about it for this podcast. So thanks to everybody who made it this far to the end. If you made it this far, you probably should subscribe because it's an unhealthy amount of time to spend watching a video. And then
Real quick, I was going to say, if people do watch this, maybe if they have any ideas for things they would like covered, we could consider it in the future as well.
Yeah, we'll definitely consider it.
yeah, definitely.
Age of Wonders 4 with Daz.
Well, no, the thing
Oh
is,
yeah, we might also be doing a Factorio playthrough.
That
fun.
sounds
Yeah, that'd
good.
be
I'd
fun
be for
actually.
that.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
should.
I
we
would like
should
to
get-
do that as well.
I'm
should
really
have
good
we
at
should
mining
aim for
coal.
once a month a multiplayer, some sort of like
That
Richard.
would be a
I
great
should
idea.
say we didn't mention it when we were talking about Zephon and Gladius, but Richard organised a Christmas multiplayer game. There's only a few of us that turned up, but God, that was fun playing Gladius. And wasn't that cool, Richard? Like, we played a cooperative game where we played as the Imperium and the Space Marines against the Tyranids. And God, it was fun. Like it was.
We should do that, definitely. I'd be
I
up
just
to
have
it.
all
I
good
love that game.
ideas. I just have good ideas, Daz. That's what it is. If you think of an
Yeah.
unorthodox idea, I'll come up with one. I'll sit here at night thinking about it. But yeah, we did a Tyranid like Imperium. I was playing Imperial Guard. You were playing Space Marines. What was Hexaboo playing? Space Marines.
He was playing Space Marines as well.
And
I
it
think.
was so good laugh. And this is like I'm trying to carry on too much. It was the whole shared experience we had. It was just so much fun. We didn't care we were getting smashed for about an hour, but we still enjoyed it.
That's a good game as well because of the WeGo system it uses. It's
Mm.
really fast to play. So
Just let you know, I was being babysat most of that game. So please find it on the internet. It was quite funny.
But no, that was a real lot of good fun actually playing that one. And Factorio, it's from the way that Lucid described it, that would be fun to play as a cooperative game. I think cooperative games are really, really cool for these sorts of videos and things because you're not hiding things, like you're not trying to get one up on anyone else.
yeah,
Just don't
absolutely.
build. Just don't
Cooperative
build that
games,
building
I think,
over
are bigger than PvP for most
Yeah.
strategy games. They're
Yeah.
huge. Like co-op for StarCraft 2 was the big thing. That was like people thought they'd be playing Archon mode. No, it was co-op.
Sins of a Solar Empire 2 has got a decent co-op scene on it now
That's
because
good.
Yeah, that'd be a fun one
yeah.
to play too.
Yeah.
That'd be really cool to play.
Yeah, I think so. Actually, it's a good competitive game. It's kind of balanced for for competitive play as well. But it's also really it's starting to develop a decent co-op scene because it's just fun to comp stomp on that game. So yeah, that might be one we could try too.
You know what would be funny if for these multiplayer games, if we have one person, just the name of the podcast, Meta Abuse. If we have it for each of the games, we have at least one person who like really studies the meta and just like kind of ruin. I don't know. They're like being like a power player and everybody else is just casual.
Where you try hard.
So
Start
you want to
yelling
play
at
the
everyone,
middles
you're doing
here,
it
Lucid?
wrong.
It's got to be Richard, man, because Richard has all
I
the
think
good
I know
ideas,
which one.
right?
The
Yeah.
main, yeah.
Which
I've
is
got-
going to be the meta abuser. He also looks a little bit like an evil villain from a 70s sci-fi.
Do I
Yeah.
look, do I look, do I look like a
Evil-
Look a
Discord
bit like
mod?
you look a bit like the Mekon. Look a bit like the Mekon from Dan Dare.
We could do a picture. We could do a logo with my face on it. That's what we need now. That's the
So, oh, now I've seen it. I can't unsee it either.
in your dreams.
Living in my head rent free, Rich. Thanks, guys. And this is Battle Mode, Richard York, Daz Tactic, Frag Tactics, and Lucid Tactics. We got all the tactics. Signing out. And we'll catch you next time, guys. Take care.